Hi, my name is Jennifer Milkey, and I'll be talking about Italy and how being a part of the Eurozone has affected Italy. When the euro was first introduced, the Maastricht criteria, also known as the Euro convergence criteria or the convergence criteria, were introduced. These criteria outline the minimum requirements which the European Union member states must meet in order to enter the third stage of the Economic and Monetary Union, or the EMU, and adopt the euro as their currency. The purpose for the criteria was to maintain price stability within the Eurozone. The thought is that when new member states are added, the other countries in the EU aren't negatively affected. So the first criteria is the HICP inflation, or the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices. This is an indicator of inflation and price stability for the European Central Bank, or the ECB. The ECB's main function is to maintain price stability. Therefore, they're concerned with controlling short-term interest rates to keep the year-to-year HICP increase below 2%. A member state wanting to adopt the euro mustn't exceed the HICP reference value, which is an unweighted average of the inflation rates in the three EU member states with the lowest HICP inflation, plus 1.5%. However, member states with rates significantly below the Eurozone average may be considered outliers and therefore ignored if it is determined that their price developments have been strongly affected by exceptional factors such as a strong recession, which was the case in 2014 with Greece. The second of the criteria is the government budget deficit. This is a ratio relative to GDP at market prices, and it mustn't exceed 3% at the end of the fiscal year. There are exceptions to this rule, such as exceptional circumstances which are predicted to be temporary, or that the deficit has declined substantially over time. Thirdly, the government debt to GDP ratio. The ratio of gross government debt to GDP at market prices mustn't exceed 60% at the end of the fiscal year. Again, there are exceptions if the ratio is found to be sufficiently diminished and approaching an appropriate value at a satisfactory pace. There is a specific formula to determine whether this is the case. Fourth is the exchange rate stability. Over the past 2 years, their currency stability shall have been stable. Participation in the ERM, or the exchange rate mechanism, under the European Monetary System, the EMS, for 2 years is expected, though it's not specifically required. Fifth, and finally, long-term interest rates must be observed. Similar to the HICP inflation rates, the average yields for 10-year government bonds in the past year mustn't be more than 2% higher than the unweighted average of the 10-year government bond yields in the 3 EU member states with the lowest HICP inflation. Again, outliers are ignored. At least once every 2 years, the ECB publishes a report checking on how well the EU members are aspiring for euro adoption as their currency, are complying with the criteria. In 1996, the first report showed that only 3 of the current 15 member states were compliant with the criteria. These were Denmark, Luxembourg, and Ireland, and therefore the Council decided to delay the introduction of the euro to 1999. In 1998 showed that 11 of the 13 applying for the euro, all but Greece and Sweden, were compliant. Since rates have the ability to change month to month, any member state also has the right to ask the ECB for an updated compliance check whenever they believe that they've met all of the economic and legal convergence criteria. It's been suggested by some that the Council should consider granting EU member states having difficulty complying the option to partially adopt the euro, meaning that they use the euro but they don't have a seat on the ECB or in the euro group. Italy's currency from 1861 to 2002 was the lira. From 1999 to 2002, the Italian lira was officially a national subunit of the euro, but the lira was still used because euro coins and notes weren't available yet. According to a short article, The Euro Crisis by Steve Wood, Italy was not even close to the EMU debt criteria when the euro appeared and has not been since. Neither was Belgium. They were accepted into the EMU for political reasons. As two of the original six, they could hardly be left out. So they were the original ones to start to be a part of the European Union. Steve Wood's article also discusses Italy's recent stagnation and economic hardships. Italy has a public debt of more than 1,900 billion euros, or 125% of GDP, a 4% deficit, next to no growth, and unemployment reaching 9%. They have an aging population and considerable exposure to Greek debt. Much of the attention in the Eurozone and the European Union, as well as around the world, has surrounded Greece, but it's also worth mentioning that Greece's debt has been over 60% of GDP since 2002 and is now over 80%. This is still nowhere near Italy's debt of 125% of GDP. It just depends on how you compare the statistics. For example, Germany also has a high debt, but can produce and sell enough to manage its own debt. The question is whether they can support everyone else's as well. This is why we're seeing a euro crisis, that and the awful spending habits that have been prominent since the end of the world wars. Slightly good news is that Germany and Spain are growing faster than expected, though not by much. Portugal grew a little. Even the Eurozone grew last year at what Matt O'Brien calls at least it's not a recession, 1.2%. An example over the long term, Portugal has grown 7.2% in the last 16 years since its adoption of the euro. Greece has grown by just over 4% and Italy right at 4%. Italy has remained stagnant for a long time. The euro was meant as a way to benefit the countries that adopted it, but what has it done for Italy? It's only made it more difficult for them to control their own inflation rates, and etc. Greece and Portugal both have a lot of debt, but both have received bailouts. They're starting to recover, and they're small enough for Europe that Europe should be able to recover. However, Italy's debts are too big to be ignored, and they're one of the major countries of the EU. The ECB doesn't deal with jobs, but the price stability and unemployment in Italy has increased at a steady pace over the last 7 years. They're the world's 9th biggest economy, and they rely on services and manufacturing mainly. Obviously, there's political instability with significant differences between the northern and southern parts of Italy. The global crisis of 2007 and thereafter had a deteriorating effect on an already fragile economy, and they show no signs of recovery.